Hello, and welcome to Masters of Divinity. I am your moderator, JP, and I am here, as always, with Father Chuck.
What up?
Hey, dude, I noticed you've kind of gone for the CNN correspondent aesthetic with your background there.
Yeah, well, that's it. What qualifies as professional these days in visual media is kind of funny.
All you need is just like your youngest just to kind of walk in, and then Cannon freaks out and grabs him and drags him out of the room.
Or like, what was that one I saw? There was some, it was either Univision or Telemundo, where a woman correspondent was talking about something, and her husband was like in the background in like a G-string.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. He just sort of walked out with like his like no pants on.
That's awesome. Well, so this has been a very interesting month, Chuck. We've talked about heaven. We've talked about hell. We've talked about purgatory, the Christian afterlife. And what better way to cap it all off than to talk about a Disney movie?
Before we get to that, I do want to. Something just popped in my head because you being in Oklahoma right now, and if people know the weather, what's going on, and
we should probably address that
in Middle America. I'm starting to think that the traditional idea of hell as a place of fire sounds pretty appealing right now.
A little bit, I gotta say. It has not been pretty. It's not as bad as what Texas is going through.
Right.
Which, if you're a listener and you're based out of Texas, our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts go out to you.
Yep.
I know that has to be horrible. I've seen so much crap, like people lining up at like a spigot in a park to fill up pots and pans just with water and stuff. Have you seen that?
No.
It's crazy, man. I just saw a photo today of just one Domino's opened up in some random town, and they were out of food in like 4 hours.
Wow.
And just like the photo of like the Domino's employees are just exhausted.
Yeah, it's so bad. People are resorting to Domino's.
I wish I could buy you all tickets to Cancun.
Just
come on, that one's for you guys.
Cruising on to Cancun.
Yeah, just cruise on down to Cancun. You can't do that? Come on. But for real, take care of yourselves. I know it's tough and it sucks, but it'll melt eventually.
Well, but like next week apparently it's supposed to be like unseasonably warm weather.
Really? I didn't know that.
I thought I saw something about that today.
Yeah, it's crazy here. I don't think I've ever seen so much snow in our farm, and I've had to we can't drive to our greenhouse, and so I have for like the past week I've had to make like a Lord of the Rings style trek from our house to the greenhouse just to turn the lights off at 6:00. And since it doesn't get it usually gets super cold in Oklahoma, but not this cold. So I always just have a hoodie and jeans and shoes, and I'm ready to go. But I've had to quadruple layer.
You're like Ralphie's brother in A Christmas Story, where just preparing for extended deep sea diving to just go get.
Yeah, just to turn the lights off.
Yeah, it's like John Carpenter's The Thing out there.
It really is. My dogs have turned into parasitic tentacle monsters and are trying to kill us.
One of the mini movies I still have never seen.
I don't know how you'd feel about it. I feel like you would like it, but also just the effects are just super gruesome.
Oh, I know.
So I don't know.
I think I would like it. Yeah. I think I would dig it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you like Aliens, so
that's the thing is you show me a movie where people do that kind of stuff to each other.
Yeah.
Bothers me.
Right.
An alien is involved. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, speaking of chest bursters, let's talk about Pixar Soul. Anyway, as I was saying, we're talking about sort of the Christian beliefs in the afterlife, and so we thought we'd end this month by talking about Pixar Soul.
What the? What is this place?
What's your name, honey?
I'm Joe. I teach middle school band. Got it, go for it! Today started out as the best day of my life.
Back here tonight, first show's at 7.
Yes! Woohoo! You know what that's gonna say? Joe Gardner. I did it. I got the gig.
Must have been sudden for you.
What? Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Help! I'm not done! Oh my goodness! Huh? Is this heaven?
No, it's the great before. This is where new souls get their personalities, quirks, and interests before they go to Earth.
Meet 22.
I don't want to go to Earth.
Stop fighting this.
I don't want to.
Okay, look, I already know everything about Earth, and I don't want anything to do with it.
You're missing out on the joys of life, like pizza. I can't smell. We can't taste either?
All that stuff is in your body.
No smell, no taste.
Or touch. See?
Okay, I get it. Wow, it's my life.
Is all this living really worth dying for? You're still alive?
Can you help me get back?
No way!
There I am. What are we waiting for?
Wait, not me!
This weird.
What is it?
151,000 souls going to the great beyond every day. And I count every single one of them. The count's off.
I will say, though, it turned out a bit differently than what I expected from the trailers.
It does, and I think that's sort of on purpose.
Yeah.
I was not expecting, like, basically everything that happens after the first act is, but like I said, if you haven't seen it, we're gonna talk spoilers. So I have to say, I watched this movie the first time a few months ago. I think when it came out, when it was released to Disney Plus, and man, I gotta say, I think it might be my favorite Pixar movie.
Okay.
I think that the animation is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like the stuff in the real world in New York, which is, I think, might be the most detailed and vivid they've ever been.
Yeah.
Which I think is on purpose. I think it serves the story. But also the afterlife stuff, or I guess you call it before life, whatever, the beyond. That is just like, I mean, that's just Pixar just flexing, right? Like, we're just going to go nuts and go crazy. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, what they're doing, where they just like went nuts with it.
Yeah, my son Ford, after we watched it, we were driving to school and there was some wind blowing, and he said something like, "Oh, the way that moves looks like that blue grass in the movie we watched last night." And I was like, "Oh wow, like I didn't even notice the grass was blue." So it like really stuck out with him.
Yeah, everyone has like the souls are like these sort of globby figures.
Right, they are not the cocoon aliens.
Not cocoon aliens. These I can deal with. But they also have like it's kind of like an RGB sort of 3-dimensional. Like, do you remember those old TVs, Chuck? Those old projection TVs where it was like a green, red, blue projector. And if you got up close to the TV, you could see like the shades of like green and red and stuff. It was like that. It's like that. And I think that's just really creative and cool. So that's something that kind of sticks out to me on the surface level. But what really impacted me was just sort of, I guess, the movie's thesis. Well, we'll kind of get into that. I want to know what your thoughts are, what your initial thoughts are of the movie, Chuck.
My initial thought that just pops in my head as I think about the movie is how impressed I am with the way they handled the subject matter. Mm-hmm. It's a movie that could very easily offend a lot of people. And there's often this thing that happens when Hollywood tries to make a movie about the afterlife, but tries to make it sort of generic. they wind up sort of creating their own like narrative and vision that creates like, it's like alternate theology or whatever. Whereas I felt that Soul handled it in such a way that it kind of works with everyone's religious ideas.
I think it's because it's so thematically driven.
Yeah.
It's not the point of it. The point is not like trying to figure out what happens after we die and how we deal with that. It's like what we've been talking about all month, which is like how that affects how we live.
They walk a very fine line of introducing a unique vision for the beyond, right? The spiritual realm, but in such a way that doesn't denigrate or take away from other religious ideas. Like I mean, as a Christian, I'm watching it, and there's like, I find nothing really all that, offensive or objectionable to what's going on. In fact, I even detected a little bit of a wink at Christianity, where the character Terry is very upset that that the number of souls that's off. Yeah. And they said, oh, it hasn't been off in millennia or whatever. And I was like, Jesus.
Yeah.
And the whole conversation about, Soul 22 having different mentors that works, Mother Teresa being one of them is very funny.
Oh yeah, that was great.
But yeah, so that's my first thing. In terms of just as a movie, I don't know that I think it's Pixar's best.
No.
It's up there. I was really touched by Coco.
Mm-hmm. Similar.
And I mean, I'm not going to try to get into which Pixar movie I think is best, but Soul's definitely up there. My kids were not all that into it.
Really?
Yeah, they were way more into Onward than Soul. But it might be the kind of movie that's geared a little bit to a slightly older kid.
That's probably true. I could see that. It's almost as if they weren't super focused on catering to a younger audience with this one.
Right. And I found that I didn't have as much of like a big tearjerker moment.
Oh, I did.
Like, I mean, I cried. I definitely shed some tears, but not in the part that I thought I would shed tears at.
Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Like, I'll tell you, the part that got me was at the moment toward the end of the movie where Joe is sort of remembering what 22 was seeing through his body.
Mm-hmm.
And starting to have like moments of his childhood and moments with his dad, and just that kind of moment of reflection while he's playing piano on his own life. There's just that moment of ponderance and just beauty of the world that kind of moved me to tears. And I also teared up a little bit in the moment where they make the plunge at the very, very end as they're heading toward the earth. But it wasn't like Up, where I was just wrecked. 10 minutes into the movie, or Toy Story or Toy Story 3, where like that, watching toys come to terms with mortality.
That was inhumane.
They're facing fire. Ooh, that's a rough movie. But no, I mean, this is the guy who is the director who made this. I can't remember his name.
Pete Docter, right?
Yeah, Pete Docter, who also made Inside Out, and did he also do Up?
Yes, he did do Up.
Yes, he did do Up, right? Because there's some fan speculation on the internet that 22 went on to become Effie or Effie.
Ellie, yeah.
Ellie. So the guy's got a pretty solid track record in terms of his Pixar movies and what they're all about. This seemed much more of a piece with Inside Out, dealing with existence and what goes on inside of us as people to inspire us to do certain things or whatever. And also
like concepts as characters, which is sort of what Inside Out is.
Right.
Yeah.
So so I liked it.
Good. Some of my initial thoughts are like, I really love the mythology of how they sort of constructed how the afterlife works and stuff, like how like the great beyond, and then the great before, and the U seminar, where all of like the little souls are sort of being prepared to go to Earth, and like how they choose to prepare those souls, they use like these really famous figures who are very accomplished and inspiring throughout history and stuff. I related to this movie like fiercely. I don't think I've ever felt more represented by a character than someone like Joe.
Yeah.
Because the way he feels about jazz is the same way I feel about cinema. And so like his journey is very similar to mine in that sense of like, well, I mean, I didn't die and like come back to life, but
you were never, you didn't spend a few hours reincarnated as a cat.
No. But just his emotional journey, I should say, of going from learning that like, just because you didn't accomplish, your dreams doesn't mean that you failed at something.
Right.
And that was like a profound thing for me to watch in a Pixar film.
Well, and one thing I really appreciated about that as for us being, post-evangelical Christians is the way that it works as a referendum on the whole like purpose-driven stuff that was a big part of our late teens, early 20s.
Totally. I mean, it's like, at PBA, everyone was very concerned about like what is their purpose in life, right?
Right.
You just heard it everywhere. That was my mantra for so many years of my life. Mm-hmm. And this movie posits that like, your spark, which is what they're trying to help 22 find their spark. It's not your purpose. It's the thing that makes you feel like you're living.
Right.
And, the scenes, I really love the scenes where it's like when he gets very lost, they call it being in the zone. It's when you find that thing you love to do and you just kind of do it and you just kind of get like caught up in it. I definitely feel that way when I'm either writing or editing.
Yes. And speaking of that, like, I love that the film depicted that realm is on the verge of the great beyond.
Yeah. I love that. That's another part of the mythology that I like.
Yeah.
That the afterlife, the spiritual realm we connect to the spiritual realm through doing the things that we love.
Yeah, well, and the character of Moonwind, right?
Yes, my favorite character in the movie, by the way.
Gosh, I love Moonwind. And I love, but he talks about thin places, and that's a concept that's really big in Celtic Christianity.
Really?
Yeah, the idea that there are certain times of day and certain times of the year and in certain locations where the barrier between our world and the spiritual realm is thinner than others, and that comes somewhat out of there's a bit of a pretext of that in Druid religion, as of course the Druids converted to Christianity when Patrick came and preached the gospel to them,
right.
And so a lot of their theological concept worked into Christianity in the Celtic realm, and that's where the whole idea of the Feast of Samhain, which we call Halloween, that's the concept, is that on that day the barrier between this world and the spiritual realm is thinner than others.
Yeah. So let's get into these characters.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a great way to explore movies when we talk about the characters. So the main character, Joe, the one that I really relate to, he is a jazz musician who also teaches band. Part-time middle school band as a way to pay the bills, because he's also trying to pursue a career in jazz, because he lives for jazz. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing I think is fun, is just sort of implementing jazz into this story. Jazz and living life, and how like both are like improvisational, I guess you could say, in a way. Or like he has to, for someone who loves jazz to learn how to live life just feels so appropriate, because it's like it's like the same thing. I'm talking about the like improvisational aspect of it. Right. So he's obsessed with jazz, and he has this audition lined up, and of course he dies before he can.
Well, it doesn't really die.
Right. Yeah. Well, he has an accident, and then he goes into the afterlife, and then he ends up in the great before at the U seminar, which is where he meets 22, which is the soul that's being prepared for Earth. And 22 is a character that is a soul before they come to Earth, and nobody. I guess you have to find your spark before you come to Earth, and 22 cannot find their spark. And I'm using the pronoun there because you find out that it's like they're not really gendered,
right?
and that they only use the Tina Fey voice because it annoys people, which I thought was kind of funny.
Which is a great like, kind of wink at the audience line. Like, why do you sound like a middle-aged white lady?
Yeah. Yeah. But like Joe is interesting because he's so dedicated to jazz that he'll do anything. He's determined to be a jazz musician, and that includes like, cheating the afterlife.
Well, right, because he's got the gig of a lifetime, to him,
right,
and he's not going to let the fact that he fell down an open manhole,
right,
and he's having an out of body experience stop him. One thing I just want to take a pause to acknowledge is that I do also find that this, I don't want to get ahead of whatever you want to talk about, but we have talked about the great before, and right. I find that is something that I kind of want to take a moment just to acknowledge how rare that is in movies.
Oh yeah.
Because one of the things I learned a few years ago was that clergy being prepped for their theological studies back in the Middle Ages and before, we're talking like going all the way back to like St. Augustine of Hippo, but then we're going all the way up to like people like Peter Abelard and St. Thomas Aquinas and others, that during that whole trajectory of the Western Christian tradition, one of the things that every serious Christian theologian had to be able to offer an account for was ensoulment. How does this, like, when does the soul enter the body? Mm-hmm. This, of course, underscores a bit of the Roman Catholic focus on reproductive rights, which we don't need to get into, but that's just part of it, is that there is an account of that. But when I learned about this, I was fascinated by the fact that it was a subject that we never discussed in seminary in my theological studies. And I didn't even come across it until after I was, graduated and ordained. And so I think it's a really interesting thing that to see a pop movie take up a subject that's well attested within, particularly medieval theology, but is not a major point of conversation, at least in my experience, in contemporary theology and discussion of the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
We talk so much about where souls are going to go. We don't talk very much about where they've come from. Mm-hmm. And so I find that a really fascinating area that they focus so much of their attention on that in the movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I mentioned in the Heaven episode, that is kind of what I grew up to believe, which is that souls come from heaven. Mm-hmm. They inhabit the body, and when you die, they either go back or go to hell.
I used to have this whole bizarre idea that when I was a kid, where I thought about the fact that if heaven is outside of time and space, then that means our souls are already there. Mm-hmm. And then I used to ask, so are we our own guardian angel? And then people at my church looked at me funny.
Is this kid high or something? But yeah, so Joe ends up in The Great Before, where he meets 22. 22, played by Tina Fey. I should also mention Joe is played by Jamie Foxx. Does a very good performance. Very good voice performance.
We should note that 22 is called 22 because they are the 22nd soul ever made.
Yeah. And they mention which soul is like the latest one, and it's like
in the trillions or something.
Yeah.
But billions. It's like 108 billion. And they actually based that number based off of the actual math estimates of how many people have been born since the beginning of time.
Right. So this is the soul number 22, and 22 inhabits the Great Before, as we've mentioned many times. And they're attending the Use seminar, which is supposed to help you find your spark that helps you prepare to go to Earth. 22 has had some problems finding that spark. Mm-hmm. And they've had many characters try to help them, from Abraham Lincoln to Mother Teresa to Carl Jung to
Muhammad Ali,
which is really funny.
Gandhi, they mentioned.
Yeah, Gandhi.
What was the Greek philosopher? Not Socrates.
Archimedes.
Archimedes.
Yeah, because they were arguing about how to pronounce gyro.
So funny.
And this is a great. I love The Great Before because not only the animation of like all these little souls hanging out, but I love the Jerrys, which are these cubist, two-dimensional characters that kind of bend in space and time and are sort of drawing. If you look closely, you can see like the energy kind of like drawing from the rest of the environment and into like their sort of wiry frame.
Well, what I love about the Jerrys, as it dawned on me, is at one point a Jerry explains what they are, and I can't remember. It's like a
construct.
Well, it's if you pay attention to the words, basically it's string theory, and so that's why they're string people.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think they're all Jerry. Like,
well,
they're all
the one in the Great.
They're all connected.
In The Great Before, they're all Jerry, and in The Great Beyond, it's Terry.
Right.
And Terry, I love Terry.
Mm-hmm.
Terry was counting all the souls. I guess the Terrys are the ones who are in charge of like keeping track of all the souls who go into the Great Beyond. And woman plays her, Rachel House, is actually a very prominent New Zealand actress. She's wonderful. You probably recognize her as Jeff Goldblum's bodyguard in Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. She does a lot of stuff with Taika Waititi and stuff. But she's great. She plays Terry, and Terry is extremely focused on getting this count accurate because Joe has sort of messed things up. And so they mistake Joe for one of these mentors, and he's got to teach 22 to find their spark. Though, of course, like most of these movies go, they're trying to, 22 is desperately trying to stay, while Joe is desperately trying to get back. And so they're trying to make like an agreement, like, hey, look, you give me your pass or whatever, and I'll go down to Earth, and you can just stay here and everything, that'd be fine. We should talk about these next round of characters. My favorite character is Moonwind.
Yes.
Moonwind is, I guess they call themselves the Mystics, right?
Right, they're the Mystics.
Yeah.
I don't remember the other Mystics' names.
I don't think they really should, but like they're like these characters who, they're all like very new agey and very like stereotypical, bohemian. And they're able to kind of like, they're earthly beings, but they're able to transcend into the afterlife. And
well, but specifically that, do they call it? It's not the between. I don't know what they call it, but it's that space where people go when they're
in the zone. Yeah.
Which was, like I said, I love that they make that as like adjacent to the afterlife.
Yeah,
somehow.
Yeah, that's so great. And I love Moonwind's character because these are supposed to be like holy people, right?
Yeah.
And their whole purpose is, while they're there, they find you find out that it's not only occupied by people who are in the zone, but also people who are like lost souls,
right?
Who are stuck in sort of an obsessive like repetition, and
which to me related a lot to our conversation on hell and purgatory.
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely. And I love that Moonwind's purpose, or not their, I guess I shouldn't say purpose, but what their job is as mystics is to free people from their obsessive, basically just to help lost souls, and to find life again.
Well, and my favorite thing is when we find out that the other mystics are like, they're there because they are meditating or something, and then you find out that Moonwind is there because he's in the zone as a sign twirler.
Yes, I love it. The most enlightened person in this movie is a sign twirler. It's so great.
And I love that he's, what is it? Subterranean Homesick Blues is playing all the time on his like mystic pirate ship that has tie-dye sails.
Yes, it's so good. Oh my gosh.
And then I also love that in that realm we see that 22 is constantly messing with Knicks players.
Yeah. Yeah, it explains why the Knicks suck. So it's all 22's fault. But I think it's cool that like 22 is like tight with Moonwind. Like they already know each other. I think that's interesting that I don't know. I think that part of their world building is, I found to be like the most fascinating and the most inspiring, I guess. There are people who like, these people care so much, and that the idea of like someone meditating is usually like the butt of a joke, right? but really like these people who are like eccentric and weird, they're actually like serving a really deep and interesting and inspiring purpose, and it is to help people in their own like metaphysical sense.
Right, and then that whole element too is kind of cool because we tend to think of that spiritual zone in terms of things like meditation,
right,
or whatever. We're less inclined to say that like an athlete and like a monk are inhabiting the same realm at certain moments of their lives. Right. But it makes me think about something, as a surfer, I know, a little bit about surfing people. But there's a really famous surfer named Jerry Lopez, who's a Buddhist. And years ago, I read an interview with him where he talked about how surfing and meditation are like the same thing. Because in both of those things, like when you're surfing, when you're on the wave, you're not thinking about anything else except for what's happening in that moment. And so it actually puts you into that state that you're trying to achieve as a Buddhist in meditation. Yeah. What I thought was just fascinating, the movie, again, touched on that and allows us to open up that conversation about where that spiritual realm is found, that it doesn't mean you have to, go on a silent retreat for 4 days to get there, that you find it when you're doing the thing you're passionate about, the thing that sparks you. Yeah.
So that's how Joe and 22 end up on Earth, because the moon wind helps them get back. Only what happens?
Didn't really help them.
Yeah, accidentally. I mean, they had like a process to do it where they could have done it accurately, but because of Joe's, determination and impatience, they fall down to Earth, and Joe falls into a cat and 22 falls into Joe's body. Which is, and that's where the movie takes a turn that I wasn't expecting it to go.
Right. No, I wasn't either. Even though it's kind of a plot hole.
Yeah.
Because
how so?
Well, how is 22 able to get into the Earth without the past? Right. Like.
That's true. But this is where the movie kind of takes a turn. Because I was not expecting a body swap movie.
No. Which they play up to really good effect.
Yeah, and it's like, I think any other movie would have been like, oh, he ends up back in his body, but now he has this really weird cat following him around, right? Mm-hmm. But like to kind of reverse it where like he's the cat, it's actually really funny.
Yeah.
So that's great because he's trying to get him to the gig, but in the meantime, like 22 is like slowly learning why Earth is so cool, and I think this is why I think it was so important for the animation of New York City to be so vivid and detailed as it is, because you're kind of experiencing it from 22's point of view.
Right, and it's not a heightened. It's not like San Francisco,
right?
From Big Hero 6, which is very like all the buildings are kind of like it's sort of trying to show it from like a kid's perspective, just how. This is very grounded.
Oh yeah, it is. I think it might be like some of the most like realistic stuff they've done. We've gone to Paris and Ratatouille, but even that, not as. I've been to both Paris and New York. This New York, like it just felt like the New York I visited. Paris, not so. It's just kind of like an MGM Studios set. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, there's a really great thing that they have on Disney Plus right now called Pixar Popcorn, which are like 2 to 3 minute Pixar shorts, and they're based on a number of the different franchises, and they have one for Soul, and it's just little vignettes of all the characters from the movie living in New York, and so it's just no dialogue. It's just very ethereal, and you should check it out because it really drives home how rich the New York is in this movie.
Right. So I was talking about the movie's thesis, and I think this is where the thesis kind of comes in this film, is during this act of the film where Joe goes to get a haircut. Mm-hmm. And, I guess I shouldn't say Joe, I should say 22. And they meet Joe's barber, and you find out that 22 is very curious, asking a lot of questions and stuff, and the barber's actually kind of surprised. Oh, you don't really talk this much about me. Interesting. Usually just talking about jazz. So you find out that the barber, Dez, which by the way, the whole barbershop sequence is also very detailed and very brilliant. So the barber kind of tells his story that he was in the Navy, that he once he left, he wanted to become a veterinarian, but his daughter was sick and he had to pay medical bills. So instead of going to veterinarian school, he went to barber school, which was because it was cheaper. Mm-hmm. And then, 22 was like, oh, wow, that's really sad because you didn't get to do what you wanted to do. Now you're stuck being a barber. He's like, no, actually, I'm really happy because I learned to love what I was doing here because I get to meet cool people like you and I get to meet everyone here. Everyone here makes me happy. So I think that is kind of the thesis of the movie, that scene.
Right. And I do want to say, too, that without risking jumping ahead a little bit, that the fact that the movie ends on a fairly open-ended note, mm-hmm. Circles back to this moment where you can start asking the questions about, where is Joe's perspective changed on what his life is going to be and all of that based off of that conversation.
I guess it's sort of when we start to learn that, I guess the philosophy of the story is that you don't have a predetermined purpose. Mm-hmm. And that there's something about living that sparks something in you. And it may not overlap with a career or something. But I think that's the lesson that Joe has to learn.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it goes back to an article I read on cracked.com 8 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I think I brought this up before in the podcast where they cited studies that showed that people who work 9-to-5 jobs tend to report being more satisfied and happy in their lives. That there's a disconnect with the way that Hollywood depicts working in a 9-to-5 job. It's a tendency to show it as drudgery, but it's partly because the artistic types that make movies, to them, it's drudgery. And so that's the perspective we're getting. Mm-hmm. And that there are plenty of people who see that the idea of a stability of 9-to-5 then frees them up for their own pursuits and passions outside of that.
Yeah. And it should. It should. Yeah. Sometimes they don't.
Right. Oh,
depending on who you work for. But you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that no, absolutely. I mean, I as someone who had recently been employed in a situation that wasn't always the most sparky part of life. Right. But that idea that finding out that the thing that you're passionate about doesn't have to be your career, whereas so much of our life is geared around the idea of oh, you really like to do this, so you should make a job out of it. And if you're not making a job out of it, then everything you're doing is second class. Whereas, there's for me, I spent many years thinking that I was going to make a life for myself in surfing. But then I realized if I made my life in surfing, then surfing stops being something I enjoy and it suddenly becomes my job.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that because it's the thing that I sort of escape to.
Right.
So
it's better to use it as a way to enjoy life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than the thing that I ought to be doing all the time, because I really related to that moment in the film where Joe, after his gig with Dorothea. Right. Is that her name?
Yeah, Dorothea Parker, I think, played by Angela Bassett.
Yeah. That after their gig where he was I thought it would feel better.
Yeah.
I related to that moment a lot.
Yeah, and she says the story about the fish, right?
So good.
The story of the fish, which is that a young fish swims up to an old fish, and the old fish asks, hey, where do I find the ocean? Right? And
the young fish asks, right? Where do I find the ocean? Yeah. And the old fish says, well, you're in it. And the young fish says, no, that's water. I want the ocean.
Right. Yeah. And, it kind of reminds me of what you were talking about. There is this, so Martin Scorsese, my teacher, he recently did a master class. I don't know if you're familiar with the master class stuff online, or they take like these professionals and they have them like bestow some kind of knowledge, like an online course almost. They use a lot of filmmakers to do like sort of these masterclass film courses. Well, they got Martin Scorsese to do one. I really, really, really want to watch it. So if anyone wants to donate like $100, so JB can take a Martin Scorsese course. But Martin Scorsese, the trailer for it opens up with him saying, listen, if you're looking for a career in the movies, that's not what I'm going to teach you. But if you feel like you have to make a movie, this is what that's for. I wish someone had told me that 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, instead of spending so much of my life trying to make it a job and not just be like, what if I just wanted to make a movie? Like, what do I just want to say? When pursuing the film industry, you think a lot about like markets. You think a lot about like what sells, what's popular. Because if you tap into that zeitgeist and you do something within that, whatever's preferred, that's where you'll find success and acceptance and people will celebrate you, whatever. But, you know, filmmaking should be an artistic pursuit. And an artistic pursuit is basically just like, I have something to say, I need to say it, I don't care what's popular or not, I just need a camera and a crew and actors and just put it out there. And it's like, when you go to film school and you can move out to LA, that is all like, okay, but like, do that, but like in a way that you can make money, you know, like you're chasing the dragon at that point, you know?
Right. And this actually touches on something you and I have talked about over the years, around how we see it particularly with social media, with the idea of everything becoming a brand and that selling out is seen as a virtue. You know, that there's a whole generation of people out there right now who do not understand why, like, say, Kurt Cobain made Courtney Love return a Mercedes. You know?
Yeah, totally.
That sense of like authenticity and the fear of being labeled a poser. Like, there's just a whole generation that doesn't understand that. And, you know, not to say that that's, you know, one's good or bad, right? It's not this generational conversation. But I do think that, like you're pointing out, we do live oftentimes in a world where we've come to value particularly creative arts, but we value them in such a way where we're saying, like, you ought to be making your career in this, but in order to make your career in this, you have to make tons of compromises. And I wonder how that affects, we see it with social media, right? Like, everybody maximizing their, you know, the algorithm by posting the same photos all the time. And, you know, you're not really ever present.
Yeah.
You're doing what you can in order to get someone else to look at it later.
Even in this podcast, sometimes where you and I are kind of like, you know, how can we chase the SEO? Right. You know, sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, and I think about, like, being here in Hawaii and seeing, like, the tourists all the time. I see people pose for photos and I'm like, are you actually enjoying the moment that you're here, or are you thinking about it in terms of how it's going to look for the gram?
Yeah.
And maybe their spark in life is
being an
their
influencer.
like their numbers and being an influencer. I don't know, but so I don't want to judge, but you know, but I do think about at what point are you, you know,
hey,
are you
listen,
doing it because you live it and love it?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see an example of somebody that was in the zone, watch our trailer for the Calvinism episode.
Oh yeah, man.
I was in the zone for that one, dude.
You were transcending time and space.
Yep. So I mean, that's just kind of my place, and I think that's why the movie sort of spoke to me so much, was because that's something I really needed to hear. I needed to see that I didn't necessarily fail in my pursuit, because cinema is still very much a part of me and who I am, and that if I do make a movie, and I might not, who knows, you know, it won't be because I needed to, like, put food on the table. It's because I just really needed to say something.
I remember, again, I may have mentioned this before in the podcast, but I remember one of our creative writing professors lamenting to me a little bit when I mentioned that I was going to become a priest, you know, sort of being like, you know, don't walk away from the creative writing piece. Don't, you know, because there's also a time where I thought about being a novelist. So, you know, don't lose that. But I started thinking about, well, every sermon I preach is a creative writing endeavor. So there's a creativity piece that's still a part of the life. It just doesn't, it doesn't happen in the way some people might expect it, right? But you can learn to bring those pieces together in different ways. And so, like, are you looking at Academy Award nominations for yourself right now, JP? You know, you're editing our podcast. You're thinking about how different cameras work for the way it looks on the screen, and you're thinking about different microphones and sound. So you're doing all of the film tech stuff here in this. So you're scratching that itch. You're doing it, and you're editing, which I think editing is one of your favorite things to do.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. And so, like, so you're able to live it out, in a way, if you choose to see it that way. So I think that's a important piece too.
And that is like, the way Dez in the movie Dez the Barber talked about like being a barber instead of a veterinarian. I kind of also related to that. Like, I kind of see this podcast as sort of as my barber shop. Though I think if you had told me like 20 years ago that this podcasting thing would be a thing, I'd be like, ooh, let's start preparing now.
Right.
I probably would have taken more radio classes. I don't know. Focus more on audio.
Yeah, but you know what though? Like, as you said, like, this feels like we have a garage band.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. We're not going to Larry King or Rush Limbaugh. Sorry, if he died, I'd mention. We're kind of more like the Shags.
Or I don't know, like we're more like like YK Kim, like the
Kinks. Yeah, definitely YK Kim.
But yeah, that's interesting how it can this movie sort of ties into passions and what a passion actually is. And it spoke to me, and I think that's why, like, I also love the scenes of like where he has that one student who's like great on the trombone,
right?
And she comes to visit him after 22 has possessed his body, and she comes to visit him just to tell him that she's going to give up on it because she is not good at it or whatever. And then 22, who hasn't gone through their transformation yet, is like, "Oh yeah, this world totally sucks. Like, it's all overrated. Like, you totally should quit."
Where we learned that Orwell was one of her mentors too, and she took the wrong lessons away from Orwell.
I forgot about that part where she says, "What is?" Oh, I should have written that down. Like my mentor George Orwell used to say, "State-sponsored education is like the rattling of a stick inside a swill bucket." I like that scene a lot because you could tell that, like, even though he really did not want to be a teacher, he knew how to be one.
Yeah.
Which is something I think 22 needed.
Well, and that's where I think the movie doesn't outright say it, but the realization for him is that he actually finds his spark through teaching.
Right.
Because, he's teaching 22.
Yeah.
And, he thinks that or maybe it's different. Maybe it's music is his spark, but his purpose is teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And he's confused, his spark with his purpose, which is a big part of the movie too.
Yeah. And, going back to like the lost souls, eventually 22 becomes a lost soul because, they haven't quite made the transformation. Joe is still very focused on getting back and doing his gig and stuff. Meanwhile, 22 becomes one of those lost souls, which is these very sort of almost Lovecraftian, ink blots with like a giant eye and tentacle-like arms and limbs and stuff. And 22's obsession is just that, like, they can't find a reason to live, like they can't find their spark. And then, like, you see all these apparitions, Abraham Lincoln, Mother Teresa, and even at the end, Joe, telling 22 that they're useless, which I thought was really sad.
Yeah.
But of course, he's able to help her out of that situation by reminding them of with one of like these items that they found when they were on Earth. kind of defeating himself in a way, which is interesting.
Yeah. Besides, 22 already knows how to do jazzing.
Yeah, that's what I like too. Like I was saying, like how it kind of ties into jazz, and that's what I'm interested in because I know you're getting into jazz, or like you're very into jazz now.
I don't know. Well, sure. I
mean, you're into it.
I'm into it. We've talked about how there's no non-smug way to do this.
Yeah, especially if you're like a white guy approaching middle age. You're like, I'm into jazz now.
Yeah, I'm getting into jazz. Yeah.
There's no way to sound insufferable. The sound
right.
does not sound insufferable.
But yeah, no, I'm really getting into jazz, and what fascinates me about jazz is the way in which it's taken a very measured, right? Like Saint Augustine of Hippo referred to music as like the third mathematics or something like that, right? So there is this well-attested approach to music as math, and jazz takes that, but shows that it doesn't have to be math, that it's feeling. And so that there's, you have recognizable tunes, but they're all a little bit different because of the feelings in the moment. And that's just such a, I'm kind of been playing with working on a history of what Episcopal Christianity is and the ways in which Episcopal Christianity can enshrine what American culture is about, and the difficulty with that task. And for me, part of it is thinking that in a lot of ways, right, jazz is so American. The way in which the Episcopal Church has developed as taking these European and even Middle Eastern, but largely European approaches of Christianity, but interpreting them in a way where there's some fuzzy boundaries and some play, makes it sort of like a jazz kind of thing, and that speaking to like with this movie and the way that like the spiritual life or just the life that we're called to live, it's not math, it's not preset, there's not a code, right? It's, there's a path, there's something that's recognizable, but we all offer our own spin on it. And that's the beauty of life. Right.
And another, I think, interesting part of the music that plays a role in this movie is the Trent Reznor score.
Right.
Whenever they go into the afterlife.
Yeah.
It's very synthy and very rhythmic and very touching. I love it.
Yeah, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who have scored very dark movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for them to do this, very interesting.
Yeah, I was really stoked. I mean, that was like actually the first piece of news I heard about this movie when it was in production, was that Reznor and Ross were scoring it. I was like, wow, this is going to be an intense movie. But no, I mean, they pulled it off, They pulled it off of not being like an aggro sound.
Well, I found that there are two versions of the soundtrack that were released on vinyl, and I want to get both of them.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah, there's two. There's the like the score, and then there's the music from and inspired by, both on vinyl. But you can get them both as a digital album. But come on, at this point, I'm getting into jazz, so I've got my turn.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. So, like, what do you think? I mean, we talked about, we were going to kind of get into sort of the ending of the movie, mm-hmm. and how it's sort of open-ended. There was just something you said you wanted to say about that.
I mean, I kind of said what I wanted to say about that, actually, which is that I think that the movie yields itself to interpretation. My interpretation of it is that he's going to find a way. I think he's going to take the job to be a teacher, mm-hmm. because he really loves it. But I don't know that he would quit being, a jazz musician in the evenings,
right,
or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, and that touches into this conversation that we've had about the way the spiritual realm informs the way we live our lives now. Like the thing I've said over and over as a priest in recent years is that I think one of the worst things that we've done is we've made this stuff boring. We've made the spiritual life, we've made the Bible, we've made Christianity boring. We've made it status quo. We've made it all of that. The idea that it's not about finding some secret purpose so that you can get to heaven someday or whatever it is that we've tried to do with this thing in the past 20 years, but is really about considering the ways in which God has given us this life and this world as a gift, and appreciating it all as a gift, knowing that one day it will come into its fullness and we'll be able to appreciate it perfectly. But we try to tap into that appreciation now. And so it's not about the code. It's not about trying to find the instruction manual or any of that kind of stuff, right? It's just learning to live it and enjoy it.
Yeah, he even kind of mistakenly, when 22 is sort of describing all the interesting things you're doing, and he's like, that's just plain old living, right?
Yeah.
Kind of misses the point, but it's like, no, that is the point. It's the stuff in between. That's the
right.
Yeah. I don't know how the cat's soul came back, because it looked like it was on its way to the beyond.
Yeah. Oh, I read a thing online. They said that because cats have 9 lives, that was just like one of the 9 lives went on.
Well, there you go. So does that mean there were 8 souls stuck inside the cat? Well,
I don't know. I laughed hard though at that cutaway to the cat.
Yeah.
Going to the great beyond.
And just the fact that it was a therapy cat, that's such a great little touch. I love it. Anything you want to kind of end this series on, Chuck, that you want to say there? Anything like that? Yeah. Final thoughts with Jerry Springer?
Kana and I have started watching Modern Family. We watched it for a couple of years, but we never caught the earliest seasons, and then we fell away from watching it toward the end. And so we decided just to start from the beginning and watch the thing all the way through. I mentioned this because last night we watched this episode where Jay Pritchett, played by Ed O'Neill, decides he doesn't want to go to church. He says him and God are good. And he finds his experience with God on the golf course. And so Manny, his stepson, he's Colombian, doesn't want to go to church either. And so he goes with him, and they start having this whole conversation about hell and heaven. And Jay tells him there is no hell. But then Manny is asking his question about well, then where do the bad people go? And he says, well, there's a section of heaven where they go. Everybody goes down, but there's a section where the bad people go, and they're sort of walled off. And he's like, well, what keeps the bad people from getting to the other people? It's like, oh, well, there's a moat with a lake of fire in between. He basically starts describing the direction, the hell. But but it was an interesting episode to watch, and an interesting conversation given the context of all of this that we've had for these past 4 episodes. To see that these questions are still very much a part of our popular culture, and that it's bigger than just, you and I, post-evangelicals, trying to make sense of where we've come from, that real people are, asking, what's going to happen? What's the afterlife? How does that affect the way we live now? Right. And this idea that we're afraid of hell, and that we allow that fear to dictate the decisions we make. And I don't think that is the mode of living that God really wants for us. And I think a movie like Soul is a great counterpoint to that, to show that we shouldn't be living our lives in fear of time running out, or missing out, or fear of going to some, place of suffering, but that God wants us to live our lives in this moment, appreciating this creation as the gift that it is. And it's, and one thing I'm aware of as I say this, and as we've talked about the movie Soul, is it's really easy, to talk about it in the terms of a life of a man who, even though he's a part-time middle school band teacher, he's got his own apartment in Brooklyn. He's got a pretty comfortable existence, based off of what we see in the movie, all things considered, right? How do you tell somebody who's, standing out in a park trying to get water from a spigot in Texas right now, or, getting Domino's because that's all they got.
Yeah.
Say, oh, just learn to appreciate life right now, right? Like, and I think that speaks to this other piece for us in the Christian life, is that we need to learn this lesson. Those of us who are in more privileged positions, to learn this lesson about what it means to live our life, so that we can then leverage our privileged existence in order to bring that freedom and liberation to others so that they can experience it alongside us. And that becomes, there's a responsibility on our behalf. And it's not because we need to do this so that we could get to heaven someday, but it's so that other people can experience heaven now. And so, like I said, I think that the message of a movie like Soul is really affirming of that, is saying, like, it's not about worrying about what's going to happen afterward. It's really about what we're doing now, and how we're helping other people experience that, which again is the theme of the movie, is helping 22 learn to not be lost, right? It's a very Christian story, actually.
Yeah.
When we come right down to it.
You never really find out like what it was specifically that gave her that spark. I think a really great moment in the final act of the film is, I think 22 is asking one of the Jerrys, like, how did you ever find out what that spark was for her? And they're like, or like what their purpose was. And he's like, what do you mean purpose? Like,
yeah,
none of those, you guys use all these words. They don't mean anything.
Yeah. Was it all you mortals and your focus on what is it? On purpose and something else. Yeah.
Yeah. He calls them basic.
I also like, yeah, I also really like that we don't know who 22 becomes.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That we're sort of, and it's that story of loss, right? Because in a classic story like that, if you don't see that kind of conclusion, right, that would be like death. The saying goodbye piece is death, but in this story, that's actually life. And so there's a beginning, and we're not privy to that, rather than,
right.
It's an ending. That's kind of an interesting.
Unless they decide to make a sequel, which, I mean, I hope they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the possibility there being of like a short that picks up the story a little bit.
Oh yeah, maybe. Just think about the Terrys and the Jerrys. That'd be great.
Well, here's something mind-blowing, because they made the point of saying that time is irrelevant in the great beyond. Who's to say that 22 didn't become somebody in the past?
That's true. Very well said, Chuck. I liked your closing thoughts.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I like that you addressed, like, it's one thing to be like, hey, just enjoy life, accept it. Like, okay, what about people who are like experiencing, racism, or like subjugation, poverty?
Yeah.
And it's
whole lot of people in Myanmar right now not able to just like go smell the roses.
Yeah, I know. So I'm glad you addressed that. Okay, so that about does it. I hope our audience has enjoyed our little series here. I think I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
We've got a great month planned out for you next month in March. We're kind of going to get back to our, just episode by episode. You'll have no idea what we're going to talk about each week.
It's a surprise.
Yeah, and then after that, we'll be back to we've got a new series coming up that we've never done before, that we've been talking about. I think since we started this podcast, we've been talking about the series that we're planning. But that's in April. March, it's going to be fun, guys. So keep tuning in. Hit the like, comment.
Tell your friends.
Yeah.
Make burn CDs with our episodes and slide them under the doors of people on your hall in your dorm or wherever you're at.
You just reminded me of. You might know this because I know you're a White Stripes fan. But apparently Jack White, isn't he like didn't he like at one point get really into upholstery?
Yes.
And then like he cut a record and he put the only copy in just some random couch.
Yeah.
and it's just out there, right?
Yeah.
Like he built a couch and he put it like in a couch cushion, and then they sold it, and no one knows who has it. So there's just like a White Stripes album, just kind of out there, or a Jack White album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was also responsible for trying to popularize this this record player that plays 3-inch records.
Okay.
I was at a record store here in Honolulu the other day, and I saw one, and like the little records. It's really fascinating, but like it's like $80 for the record player.
Oof.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I don't know why, but you just reminded me of that. Of like, I'm just imagining like our fans burning our episodes and CDs and like hiding them in weird places.
Hey, look, here's the deal. If I ever write a book, right? If I ever publish, well, I've written books. I need to get them published. I fully plan on anytime I'm in like a Barnes and Noble or something, I'm going to grab a couple copies and just sign them and put them back on the shelf.
Nice. I'm surprised more authors don't do that, but
it'd be pretty funny if I got kicked out for like vandalizing property and like, it's my book.
You have to buy it now, sir. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next week. Father Chuck, thank you.
You're welcome, bro.
Good journey.
Good journey.